This is Kay Rudolph. The following presentation on census research will introduce you to some of my favorite tips and tricks for using census records in family history research. I'm going to discuss collecting the information that you'll need to identify your ancestor in census records, different ways to search the censuses on the Family Search and Ancestry and Heritage Quest websites, how to choose your terms, how to filter your results, and finally, how to connect what you already know about your ancestor to information that you find in new records, and how to verify that a new record is in fact related to your ancestor. So let's start with an example. My grandfather, William Edward Rudolph, is my target. When you're doing family history research, don't ignore the family that you know. Collect all the records that you can, even of currently living members of your family, because they will provide clues that will help you identify earlier records and earlier ancestors. So yes, I knew my grandfather, but there's a lot of information that I had to learn about him, and censuses is a critical place to begin. You're going to want to collect every census that's available for each of your ancestors. The most recently available census is the 1940. In 2022, we'll have the 1950, and I'm going to go back at that time and fill in for my father and my grandfather and my aunts and uncles with the information from the 1950 census. So keep adding to your family history research. Start with what I could recall about my grandfather. Do a brainstorm, list down all the facts, all the things that you can remember. His name was William Edward Rudolph. My father was junior. My grandfather was senior. I was with him when he died in 1975. He was 84 at the time. I remember him telling me that he grew up in Brooklyn, and he talked about meeting his wife, my grandmother, Helen Lockwood, there. He was an engineer. He spent most of his life in South America. He worked for the Anaconda Mining Company, and they moved to South America in 1922 or 1923, shortly after my father was born. My father spent most of his school years at boarding school in Connecticut, and his vacations he spent with his uncle Hal in New Canaan, Connecticut. My grandfather also had a sister, Gladys. Aunt Gladys was married to Dan Streeter. And I met my grandfather's youngest sister, Natalie, in California shortly before she died in 1985. Family lore was that one of my ancestors was the first American journalist to interview a pope. I also remember that my father told me that his grandmother was named Catherine, just like my grandmother on my maternal side of my family. I was named after both of my grandmothers, Catherine and Helen, and so it kind of tickled my fancy that I was also accidentally named after my great-grandmother as well. So I take all of these recollections, all of these little bits of family lore, and I record them in a family group sheet. I'm going to continue to update this as I get more information. So this is for William Edward, who would have been the child of somebody whose wife's name was Catherine. Now, he was born in 1890, about 1890. If he died in 1975 and he was 84 years old. So that means that his parents would have been at least 20 years old. So his parents would have to have been born before 1870. Family lore, possibly he was born in Brooklyn. He married around 1920. My father was born in 1921. And again, possibly they married in Brooklyn. I recall his death in the summer of 1975 in Tucson. And my grandmother, Helen Estelle Lockwood, who had predeceased him. I have the information about Gladys. I remember that Gladys had passed away by the time my grandfather died in 1975. And possibly that might have been in Washington State. Her husband's name, Daniel Streeter. Uncle Hal, he also had predeceased my grandfather. And Natalie, he was nicknamed Nair. She had died about 1985 in California. And I remember that her husband was Winthrop Burr, who died shortly after they married. So I'm going to start with the most recent census records available for William Edward Rudolph, and that would be the 1940 census. So I looked for him in the 1940 census, did not find him. That's probably because he was in South America at that time. But I did find him in the 1930 census, and so I'm going to want to record all the information I can that might be useful to me in this census. So in the top left corner of the census page, it tells me where the family was enumerated. In the village of Garden City, looks like in parentheses it says part. Township or other division of county, Hempstead Township. The county of Nassau in New York. This left-hand column has the name of the street, Euston Road. And if you look carefully, you can see 197 is the house of my grandfather's family, which is something that I want to see if it still exists. So I go to Zillow.com and I do a search for 197 Euston Road, Garden City, New York. And I can see that this house was built in 1924. So that would have been 6 years before my grandfather was enumerated there in the 1930 census. And so I can actually get some information about the house, and I can even see a photograph of it. So if I were to want to show family members this, some of the family who might have been alive, might have visited him, this might spark some memories, some recollections that would add more facts, more details to my knowledge about my grandfather. And besides, it's just fun to take a look at a place where your family lived. So, back to the 1930 census. On the top right-hand corner, you're going to want to note down the enumeration district and the page number so that you can quickly return to this if you ever need to. But you also want to note down the enumeration date, April 12th, 1930, and you'll see why in a minute. Okay, so here is the family. We have William E. Rudolph, the head of household, with Helen E., his wife, William E. Jr., my father, their son, Jean A., their daughter, and Ada Smith, their maid. They're renting the house, paying $75 a month. They have a radio, and it is not a farm. He's a male, white, 41, married at age 30. So that gives me a detail that I didn't have before. It specifies when they were married. Helen was 29 at the date of her first marriage, at least according to this 1930 census. And you see down here Jean is 1 year and 10 months old. So we can calculate on the basis of that she was born in June of 1928. Continuing on, moving to the right, we have William, born in New York. Both parents are born in New York. So now we have information about his father, that he was born in New York. And we know that Catherine was born in New York, his mother. And Helen was born in Massachusetts, of parents born in Massachusetts. My father was born in Ohio. And you can see here, his father was born in New York. His mother was born in Massachusetts. And we have Jean's data. And continuing on to the far right, we have information about my grandfather's occupation. He was a building contractor. He did not have prior military service, and my grandmother was not employed, nor were the children. One of the earlier columns did note that the children were attending school. That is my father, not my infant aunt. So summarizing the information from the 1930 data, I have the information about rental, where they were living, their age, so I have the estimate now of when he was born, where the parents were born, the year that he married, when and where my father was born, when and where my Aunt Jean was born, and I actually have that down to a month, what my grandfather's occupation was, and the fact that there was no prior military service. Important to know. I won't be spending a lot of time looking for military records for him. In the 1920 census I found my grandparents, William and Helen, boarding in Albany, New York. My grandfather was age 30, bringing him to a birth date of 1889 or 1890, according to this census. Born in New York, of parents both born in New York. Married to Helen E., who was age 28 on the census. So she would have been born in Massachusetts in 1891, 1892. Now you'll recall that in the 1930 census, it's listed that she was married at age 29. So censuses are not always consistent or correct. Take them with a grain of salt. He's working as an engineer at a paper mill. I'm going to update my family group sheet, adding the place of birth for the parents. I'm adding the place of birth for my grandfather, marriage location, continuing to add the little bits of information that I get. Now the next thing that I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to get the 1910 census. Now my grandfather married in 1919, therefore this 1910 census he's going to be living with his parents. So that is going to be taking me back a generation. There are two free sites that you can use to research. FamilySearch.org is my favorite and go-to site. It has a great index with a lot of good filters. One problem, though, is the 1870 census is not searchable by county. And that is a real drawback when doing research on the 1870 census. You really can't use FamilySearch.org for that. But you can use the Heritage Quest website. It's free with your county library card. It uses the Ancestry.com index and images, which means that it is searchable by county. And you have the option to select searches for a county and adjacent counties. And that's very useful as well. Either way, it's very good to know that there are a couple of different sites that you can go to to search for your relatives in the censuses, because what you'll find is that census enumerators were not necessarily hired for their handwriting skills. And sometimes the indexers are hard put to figure out what is written in a census record. And so you may find that a family is indexed differently on FamilySearch.org from the way they were indexed in Heritage Quest and Ancestry. So if you can't find the family on one index, try a different index. So here we are at the Family Search website looking at the record search page. And I'm going to just start with a very broad search here. I'm going to enter very basic information. His name, William Edward Rudolph. I'm not going to check any check marks here. That would restrict the results to only records that listed the name exactly it was written there, William Edward. You don't have to worry about capitalization. It ignores that. But if I had checked this checkbox here, I would not get any information for William Rudolph without the middle name Edward, or William E. So I want to leave these blank. Now, every time you add a field, it can serve to restrict the records that you get. So you want to limit the number of search fields you use when you start a search. And if you need to become more restrictive, if you get too many results, do so. But first, start with a very loose set of search terms. Now, when it comes to the birth year, you want to be very flexible, especially when you are researching censuses. The censuses are not reliable as far as the records for the age of the individuals. Sometimes census enumerators did not speak to a member of the family in order to get their information. And so you may be getting hearsay, or the census enumerator may have misunderstood. He's going around recording hundreds of people's names every day and doesn't necessarily have the time to double check all of his entries. So we get 562 search results. I know it looks tempting. There look to be a lot of things here that are promising to be records related to my grandfather, but I'm interested in the 1910 census. I want to have a focused research plan. My goal first is to collect the censuses. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to click on the Collections tab, and I'm going to click on the 1910 census. Then I'm going to scroll down and use the filter box to filter to the residence place of New York. I could filter all the way down to a county, but I'm not quite sure whether they were living in Kings County or New York City or New York County. So I'm just going to look at these 23 entries for William Rudolph living in New York. And it turns out we have the very first one, somebody who is recorded born in the right time period, living in Brooklyn. And when I look at the names, there's my Aunt Gladys, Harold would be Uncle Hal, Aunt Natalie. And when I saw this, I remembered that my grandfather had mentioned having an Aunt Minnie or Mamie, something like that. So that would be Wilhelmina. When I click on the link and open it, I'm taken to the index page for that record. If I click on this image here of the record, it opens it up in a pop-up window. I can open it in a separate window. I can download it. I always recommend downloading. We can count on having these census records always available, but it's awfully convenient to have these records at your fingertip whenever you need them. Now, the next thing that you want to make sure you do is you want to make sure you attach it to your individual's profile. I have already done that. You can see that here because it says Review Attachments. And if you click on that link, you'll see the attachment page that shows the left column is the names of individuals and their data as listed in the record, in this case the U.S. Census 1910, and the individual in the right-hand column, that is the person in the family tree that has that record attached to them. And so I have attached this record for William H. Rudolph to my great-grandfather, whom I now know to be William Henry. So when you see this, this is what it means. It means that somebody has been doing research on this family, and they have identified that the individual, William H. Rudolph, listed in that census record is William Henry Rudolph. You'll want to go and look at the profile in the family tree and make sure that their conclusions are sound. And we'll be talking in later webinars about what you're going to want to do to make your analysis clear and understandable to future researchers. Now, by attaching it to his profile, then that record, the link to it is available on his profile page. It will show up in the list of his sources, and anybody now who comes across his profile can click on that link and immediately get to the page for the image of the census. Now, we had a Mary Sapance living in the household. She was a 21-year-old servant. I want to attach this to her in the family tree. I'd like to see if I can find more information about her, and one way to do that is to start a profile for her. So I'm going to need to first, in order to attach it to the tree, get a profile number for her. Go to any of the family tree pages and click on this down arrow next to the Person tab. And at the very bottom, you'll see Add Unconnected Person. You go ahead and click that. It opens up this box. Enter the information that you know. Click Next. It's going to provide some possible matches that might be the individual you're looking for. But I don't see anything here that is obviously Mary Sapance, because I really don't know very much about her at this stage. So I'm going to go ahead and create her new. If it turns out in the course of my research that I do find that she does already exist in the family tree, that there is a duplicate of her, I can merge those two profiles later. So I'm going to go ahead and create her new. And now we have her profile page. She has 0 sources attached, 0 anything attached, just the basic information that I provided when I created her. Now this star here, if you click this so that it's filled in black, that means that you will have a notification whenever there is a change made to her profile. So if somebody else does some research and attaches records to her or changes information on her profile page, that will show up on my change list. So if there's anybody that you are going to be researching that you want to keep tabs on, make sure you fill in that star. All right, this is the index number that we are going to need in order to attach records to Mary to her unique profile page. So I copy that, LT17-D3B, and go back to that attachment page. Here we have Mary. Now it's suggesting attaching it to William Edward Rudolph because that was the most recent person that I had been attaching things to, but that's not who I want to attach it to. So I'm going to go and I'm going to click on this change link here. I want to change the person in the family tree to whom I'm going to attach this record. So I click that change link and I enter the LT17-D3B, click the arrow, and now it has the person in the record matching the person that I want to attach that record to in the tree. I click compare and confirm, yes, that is the right person. I'll add these details to her timeline and click attach. And there we have, you can see now the record is green on both sides, indicating that it is successfully attached to her record. When I go back to Mary's profile page, now she's listed as having one source. Now, as I mentioned, sometimes you want to check Heritage Quest if you aren't able to find the individual in Family Search. So let's talk about how you do that. You can access Heritage Quest by clicking on the website for the Santa Rosa County Library System, is the one I use, but all counties that I am aware of do subscribe to Heritage Quest. So make sure you get a library card because you'll need to enter your library card number. And then log into your library, your county library webpage, look for something like a research tab and a link to genealogy. In the Santa Rosa County, it opens up this page, which you're probably going to want to do a little bit of exploring on. There's an awful lot here, but not now. I want you to look down. There are actually two links for Heritage Quest. One to be used when you're inside the library and one to be used when you're outside the library. Since I'm working at home, I'm going to click on the second one. That asks me to enter the barcode from my library card number, and I do that, and it opens up the home page for Heritage Quest online. This changes periodically, so it may look different when you open it up, but you're going to look around for the census records, and we are going to be looking for the 1910. So we have the options to enter an exact name, a name that is similar or sounds like, or using the last name, you could even use Soundex. With the year of birth, you can enter plus or minus as many as 10 years. For the location, I entered New York. When you're entering location, you want to be sure to use one of the standardized places that they suggest. When you use a standardized place name, then you get many more options for searching. I can restrict the search to only Brooklyn, to only Kings County, to Kings County and all adjacent counties, to only New York, to New York and all adjacent states, or to the United States. So this is a very handy way to search for people if you think, for example, the family might have been in New Jersey. I can also add members of the family here in this section. Beginning in 1880, family relationships are listed. And so beginning with the 1880 censuses, Heritage Quest and Ancestry give you the option of searching with the name of a sibling or a spouse or a parent or a child. Now, Family Search provides this option as well, and they go one step further in that in earlier censuses, 1850, 1860, and 1870, they will let you search for any other names in the household. You can't specify whether it's a son or a wife or a father, but you can specify another person's name in the household. And we end up getting one result. William E. Rudolph, with the parents William H. and Catherine, living in Brooklyn. This is the census page that we had seen earlier on the Family Search website. I recommend when you are researching someone and you're going to really want to dig into that family, that you go the extra mile and transcribe each of the records that you find for them. Because inevitably, when you read a record, you will overlook something. Another advantage of transcribing a record is that then you can search your computer for I want to see any record or any document that has the word journalist, or any document that has the word Hancock. And it gives you more flexibility in pulling up information that if you can't remember where you saw that, but you can remember some piece of information that was included in the record. This is a quick way to get through it. So I have listed out all of the details about the location information off of the census, the top left corner and the top right corner, the street address, the dwelling family number. So we have the name of the head of household, William H. Rudolph, white, married. Married one means this is his first marriage. They have been married for 22 years. That is one of the columns in the 1910 census. Where he was born, where his father was born, and their native language. Whether he speaks English, his occupation, place of work. It says he works on his own, so he was a freelance journalist. He was not out of work. He was not unemployed in the previous year. He reads, writes, owns his own home, has a mortgage, and it is a home and not a farm. And so each individual has lots of little tidbits of information. Here we have Catherine. It lists her being born in New York, which matches our records. But as you'll find, it doesn't match future records that we're about to find. We have Augusta is William's mother-in-law, which suggests that she's Catherine's mother. She's a widow, has 3 of 3 living children. That is, it says that she bore 3 children and all of her 3 children are still alive. Wilhelmina, the sister-in-law, was a forewoman at a publishing house, and Mary, the live-in servant. Now, when we go to the 1900 census, I do the same thing and transcribe it, and I find now Catherine is listed as having been born in New Jersey, not in New York. So I want to note that down. I don't yet have a marriage record. I might want to look in New York, and I might want to look in New Jersey. I do have an approximate year of marriage. In the previous census, they had been married 22 years. In 1900, they had been married 12 years. So they're consistently saying that they were married in 1888, and their first son was born in 1889. One of the nice things about every census is it seems to have little tidbits of information that are not contained in other censuses. The 1900 census lists the birth month and the birth year. So we don't have to calculate when he was born. This census is telling us he was born in February of 1889. He was born in New York. His father was born in New York. His mother was born in New Jersey. That would be Catherine. Uncle Hal, Gladys, Natalie, Augusta, the mother-in-law, and here's Aunt Mamie, the sister-in-law, who would have been my grandfather's aunt. So now we're going to be jumping back another generation. We can't look at the 1890 census for New York. Unfortunately, most of the 1890 censuses were destroyed. Some still exist for occasional counties here and there. As I recall, it's something like about 6% of the returns nationwide are still extant. So there's a possibility that your ancestors lived in one of those counties that still has the 1890 census. Most of us aren't so lucky. So if the family was married, if William and Catherine married in 1888, that means the 1880 census, where we expect to find him next. He's going to be living with his parents. How are we going to recognize his family? We don't know an awful lot about him. Let's take a look at what we do know. We do know that both his parents were born in Germany, and we know that he was born probably in the period 1861 to 1864, based on the information that we have from the 1900 and later censuses. He grew up to become a journalist, and by 1900, he was living in Brooklyn. Now, we want to note down the naming patterns that he used, because the names he gave his children may be names that he got from his aunts and grandparents. So William, Natalie, Gladys, Harold, and Edward. We're going to want to pay careful attention to see if we can find anybody in the 1880 census who fits this profile. So we go to Family Search, we enter the information we know. I'm going to be very loose because sometimes the censuses are a little unreliable. So I'm going to look at people born in that entire decade. I am restricting the birthplace to New York. The name William Rudolph and the residence New York, I am not specifying, but by listing them, they're going to come up as the preferred search results. And so we get 6 results for William Rudolph in New York, born 1860 to 1870. Well, taking a look through them, we have William Rudolph, William Rudolph, William Rudolph, William Rudolph, and Oscar W. Rudolph with an F. My family has always been very consistent about spelling the name PH. Now that is true that this is a census where the enumerator may not have cared how my family spelled it. But I also don't have any history of an Oscar, and we don't have any information that would suggest that William Henry's name was Oscar William Henry. So we've narrowed our possibilities down to a group of 5. Let's go through and look at each one in detail. We have William, who is the son of Henry and Maria. Both the parents in the household were born in Germany. That fits. The father is listed as a coal miner and a wood dealer. William is born at 1865. That's at the tail end. We're really looking at a William born 1861 to 64, but it's possible. He is a clerk in a coal office. That indicates he's literate, which would be a requirement for somebody who became a journalist. He is living in Long Island, which is somewhat close to Brooklyn. We don't have any of the names except for perhaps that William H. might be Henry, and now I do know it is. But it is a possible family. Now we have Edward and Johana. Again, we have both parents born in Germany. That fits. The father in the household, Edward, is a barber. William was born about 1862. Now this is right in our target zone, 1861 to 1864. William is working as a printer. Again, that is a good fit for somebody who became a journalist. They're living in Brooklyn. That's where my William was living in 1900. And we have that name Edward. My father was William Edward, and his father was William Edward. So that's a very promising family too. Next we have William and Hennetta. The father is German, but the mother was born in Ireland, which really crosses that one out. That's just not possible. My family was very consistent that both of William H. Rudolph's parents were born in Germany. He is the right age, though, 1861, but he's working as a piano maker. This just is not a really likely introduction to being a journalist. They're living in Middletown, Richmond County, New York. That's about mid-state. It's pretty far away. We do have the consistency of the name William, though. But this business about the mother being born in Ireland really crosses this one out. Next we have Rinard and Gertrude. Again, both parents born in Germany. The father is a farmer, and we just don't have a family tradition of ever being in farming. We have strong urban roots. William was born in 1870. This is just really too young. He's living in Denning, Ulster County, New York, which is really far from Brooklyn. And there are no common names with our William Henry. And next we have a William Rudolph who is living on his own. We don't know who his parents are, but we know they were both born in Germany. He was born in 1860, which is just a little bit too old. He works in a piano factory, which not really likely that he would have become a journalist. So it's kind of interesting. I wonder if he's connected to that other fellow who was the piano tuner. They're living in he's living in New York City, which is close to Brooklyn, but of course, since he is living alone, we don't have any other names to work with. Next thing I want to do is I want to take a look at how these guys show up on the map. My William Henry was living in Brooklyn in 1900. The Long Island is somewhat close. These other two are pretty far away. I'm going to start with, well, the one with no parents is going to be kind of tough. But that Edward and Johana, that was a possibility. There were several things about that family that looked like a good fit. Father is a barber, urban, right age, working as a printer, living in Brooklyn. So I'm going to take a look at that family in the 1880 census. And we have here Edward and Johana with an older son, Emil, my William, possibly, a younger son, Edward, and 3 daughters, Anna, Matilda, and Louise, plus a couple of other people. All right, let's take a look at this Edward. Before I go too much into this 1880 census, I want to see if this family has any connection with my William Rudolph in the 1900 census. So I am going to try looking for Edward, the younger son. I like this because It is a somewhat less than common name, but it is a name that is likely to have been written correctly and indexed correctly. ML is a little unusual, and it's possible that it could have been butchered by the indexers if they didn't recognize what the enumerator had written. So I'm going to look for an Edward Rudolph. He would have been born in 1870 in New York. So looking in the 1900 census for an Edward Rudolph born in New York between 1868 and 1872 and living in New York, I only have one option. All right, let's take a look. This is Edward, a brother, born in July of 1870. Who is he living with? Anna is the head of household. Tilly is the sister. Louise is the sister. So this is definitely the same household that we were looking at in the 1880 census. It's the younger brother Edward with the three sisters. We definitely know that we're looking at the same Edward in 1900 that we are looking at here in 1880. Can we find anything that connects this Edward to my great-grandfather, William Rudolph? So let's start by looking at their geographic relationship. My great-grandfather was living at 265 Hooper Street. That's at this mark A. And the Edward with Anna and Tilly and Louisa was living at 182 Grand Street. Now, according to Google Maps, that is a mile away, which seems very reasonable for a pair of brothers. So that suggests, okay, they might be. Let's see if there's any other details that we can pull out of that 1900 census that will help confirm or reject Edward as my great-grandfather's brother. Well, this is the clincher. What is Edward's occupation? He's a reporter. My great-grandfather was a reporter. His younger brother followed in his footsteps. The likelihood that there are two William Rudolphs, one of whom became a reporter and another whose brother became a reporter, that's a pretty small likelihood. The details about Edward's brother fit perfectly with my great-grandfather. The fact that both William and Edward are reporters in 1900, living about a mile apart, really cements for me that they are brothers. And therefore, Edward Rudolph and his wife Johana must be the parents of these children. Well, what we can say is that Emma, William, Edward, Anna, Matilda, and Louise are the children of Edward, and Johana is his wife. So I go through and I transcribe the census, pulling out all the little pieces of information that I can. Edward Rudolph, white male, 47, married. He is a barber from Baden, and both his parents are from Baden. Johana, white female, 48, married, keeping house. She's from Prussia. It says Emil is 20. He's a single, a bookkeeper. He was born in New York. His father was born in Baden. His mother was born in Prussia. that would seem to fit. William, single, working as a printer. He would later become a journalist. Edward, who was in school. Anna, at home. Matilda, and Louise. And the two other individuals in the household are barber clerks working for Edward. Now that's an interesting thing because I've heard since that barber shops are great places for people to get the news. Everybody comes into the barber shop and shares their information. So perhaps that's how William and Edward got their start, by hanging out in their father's barber shop. Every census, I mentioned this earlier, every census has uniquely valuable information. And I've created this chart to remind myself of what unique pieces of information are available in each of the different censuses. Like the 1900 census lists the month and year of birth. The 1880 census lists the age and months and the month of birth for children under 1 year. So if you have an ancestor who was born in the 1880s, there's a 10% chance that you'll find their month and year of birth listed in either the 1880 or the 1870 census. So you can see the need for you to look at every single census, not just for these unique pieces of information, but also to confirm the information gathered in one census against the information gathered in another. There's all sorts of really interesting tidbits that will provide you tips on other records you need to look for. For example, home ownership. The 1930 tells us the value of the home and whether they are renting or owning. And it also tells if they own a radio set, which is a cool thing to do. But if they own the home, then that lets you know that you're going to be needing to look for some deeds. Likewise, the 1850, 1860, and 1870 census are going to tell you the value of real estate owned, which gives you an indication of whether you need to be looking for some deeds. If you have immigrant ancestors, the censuses will give you information about their immigration status, the information about the parents' birthplace begins to be recorded in the 1880 census, though the 1870 census does indicate whether the father or mother are foreign born. Again, more financial details, school attendance, ability to write, impairments, additional information about the family. So let's talk a little bit about some of the additional tools that you have to help you in your searches and to help you analyze your information. I'm going to be talking here about using wildcards and filters and assembling timelines. One of the tools that you're going to want to be comfortable using are wildcards. The asterisk will take the place of any number of characters from 0 to as many as you could possibly want. That means that if you're searching for a name that might have been butchered, you want to look at the name and ask yourselves which letters are most likely to have been rendered correctly, and use those letters only, filling in the rest with asterisks. In this case, I was not finding anything for Fick, F-I-C-K, but I knew that name Fick, the letter F can sometimes be taken as a T or even an L, and so I used a wildcard asterisk followed by ICK. The rule for using wildcards is you have to anchor your search with either a letter, a real letter at the beginning of the name or a real letter at the end of the name, and you have to include at least 3 real letters, but they don't have to be consecutive. Now, I use the asterisk here because it can take the place of no characters, 1, 2, and so forth. If you are looking for a name and there is just one letter you think might be mistaken, you might use a question mark instead. A question mark will replace a single character. So you can see here, looking for any given name with an NCLS, I have a couple of possibilities. With any surname ending in ICK, born in Germany in the period of 1830 to 1840, and residing in New Jersey, returned 2 possibilities, Nicholas Frick and Nicholas Nick. Now, when you look at how these 2 names were indexed in the top right, we're looking at the return for that person, the same person, in the Ancestry Heritage Quest Index, as we're looking here in the Family Search Index. So you have different people, different indexers, looking at the same record, and one of them sees Nicholas Frick, and the other one sees Nicola Fick. And they have him living in the household of Frederica Ismus or Frederick Seamus. So this is a perfect example of where using both of our available census databases might help where the name is recorded incorrectly in one, but correctly or somewhat correctly in the other. Now, before you berate the people at Family Search for misindexing this, let's take a look at what they were looking at. This is the entry. As you can see, it's pretty cryptic. There's actually more than just bad handwriting going on here. You notice that we have this person's given name, but nothing, a blank in the space behind it. These numbers here are dwelling 165, that 165th dwelling that the census enumerator visited, the 287th family that he interviewed in those 165 dwellings. But the odd thing is that family number 286 in the previous dwelling appears to be a head of household, and then the next person is keeping house. What has happened is this. The census enumerator makes a copy of the census that he uses when he goes on his house-to-house visit. He makes 2 copies, in fact. One of those copies is sent to the federal government, and that is what we are looking at here. We are looking at a copy of his original census. And what did he do when he copied this census? He inadvertently put the household and dwelling number on the wrong line. Nicholas Fick is the head of household number 287. Frederica could be Isthmus, is Fred's wife or sister or possibly aunt, but he has nothing to do with Nicholas. And so you want to be careful about that. That's another reason why we have to be a little bit skeptical of census records, because when we look at a census, we are looking at a transcription. We're looking at a copy of an original record. And every time you copy a record, you introduce the possibility of errors. So we have these two separate households. All right, the last item that I want to talk about is timelines. I use these frequently to organize the information that I have into a chronology of a person's life so that I can help decide whether I have two separate individuals who happen to share the same name, or whether the activities, the facts that I have really reflect a single person. I use this format that I'm going to explain. I can use this in both a Word document or I can use it in Excel. So let me talk about the format that I use in preparing these timelines. I want you to note that my dates are formatted with a 4-digit year followed by a decimal point, a 2-digit month followed by a decimal point, and a 2-digit date. That allows me to sort this table chronologically. Excel has a problem with dates before 1900. So if you try to format something as a date before 1900 and then format and then sort, you're going to run into some problems. So by putting these periods the way I have, I'm forcing Excel to sort these as text. And likewise, I can sort this table in Microsoft Word and sort this column numerically as text. And it is going to put these into proper order. If I do not have a month or a date, that is fine. This format will still sort them into the right order. For locations, I have them by country, then state, then county, and then town. Though most of my work is in U.S. research, and so I leave out the country. This allows me to sort by this column location, so I can pull together all the events that happened in New Jersey, for example, or all the events that happened in Brooklyn, New York. And a timeline is an invaluable tool for making sure that you understand the records that you've collected for your ancestor and how they fit together to describe your ancestor's life. So the key points that we've discussed today: start your research with the most recent census, the 1940. Collect the census records for every family member in every census. Check every column. Make sure that you understand every piece of information that is provided in that census record. You also want to note down the neighbors. We didn't talk about this, but we will be doing that later in future videos. Neighbors, especially when you get into rural areas and earlier censuses, are often related to your ancestor. People in rural communities lived near people they knew, near families. Finally, keep a record of what you learned and where you learned it. Transcribe records. Be very detailed about where you get your information from. You're going to end up finding a lot of conflicting information. You want to be able to know what your sources are when you have to decide which piece of information to keep and which to dispose of. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this, and I look forward to the next one.